Hey folks, this is Best in Slot, and in tonight's video we're going to theorise, speculate and discuss the possibility of feathered dinosaurs in Jurassic World Evolution 2. Now I don't want to get anyone's hopes up right away, we haven't got like brand new information about this, this is all speculation and discussion. It's actually quite an interesting subject when you get into it, as we'll see later on hopefully, but I don't want to mislead anyone or anything like that. There isn't confirmation here either way. We do have a tweet from Frontier about feathered dinosaurs, and it is literally the only piece of information we have right now that is certain, and it's this one right here. Hi Jane, the real dumb bean. As big fans of the Jurassic World franchise, we're very excited by the news about feathered dinosaurs in Jurassic World Dominion. While we have nothing to announce right now, we're certainly keeping a close eye and will share any future news on our official channels. Now, how you interpret this phrase will depend on two things primarily. The first will be your own personal stance on feathers and life and everything else. You can read it either positively or negatively. And the other is kind of knowing how Frontier typically posts on social media and the kind of language they usually use when they don't actually want to talk about something. So for example, if we think back to when they talked about Camp Cretaceous, they said we have no plans for Camp Cretaceous content. This is different. Now, I really don't want anyone to take this as confirmation. This is purely my personal opinion. To me, this reads leaning positive towards the inclusion of feathered dinosaurs. Now, how that's going to happen is what we'll discuss in a moment. But it does suggest, I think typically they would have shut this down a little bit more if there was no intent to ever have feathered dinosaurs in Jurassic World Evolution 2. That's my personal stance on it. Please don't take that as gospel or anything like that, and I'm sure people will read this entirely different. But, you know, you're here for my opinion, amongst other things. You know, charm, wit, general sexiness. Right. Now, before we dig in a little bit deeper, there's one thing I want to say, and that is, this topic tends to inspire a little bit of vitriol and quite a lot of argumentative behaviour, and I kind of want to avoid that as much as possible. Some people, like myself, are big advocates for feathers in Jurassic World as a franchise, and indeed in Jurassic World Evolution and other Jurassic Park media, and some people aren't. Some people want to stick to the 90s style, the retrosaur dinosaurs that have already been established in the franchise. For what it's worth, I think Dominion is going to do a very good job at balancing those two things, and I think we'll get the best of both worlds, but it's worth not besmirching either side. People just have different desires and wants from Jurassic Park, and they're not always going to mesh with each other, so this is just a call to say keep it nice and wholesome. People will have differences of opinion, and that's okay. That's what makes us exciting. If we all thought the same thing, we'd be like a big, terrifying, homogenous blob, and we could then go take over the rest of the universe, and maybe that's not a terrible idea. Show those aliens who's boss. So why is this even a topic in the first place? Why has this come up? Well, this is pretty obvious, but a lot of you will have seen this image by now. I apologise for those who think of this as a spoiler, but the other day Colin Trevorrow himself tweeted out this image, and this is of course already in the cinema as well, and has been for weeks now. And this is a clip from the Cretaceous era preview of Jurassic World Dominion. And within that preview there's many dinosaurs, and for the sake of no spoilers I won't be discussing any that haven't been officially publicly shared, but what we see here is both the Giga, but more importantly is a very suspiciously small and hopefully juvenile basal Tyrannosaurid. I don't know why I'm highlighting the entire thing. And this little guy is called Morose Intrepidus. But the entire body is coated in a coat of feathering. It's beautifully feathered, it's really well made, and it is the first proper, full-on, somewhat paleo-accurate feathering we've ever had in the Jurassic Park franchise. It was a big deal. We did a video about it right here on the channel. And not only is it a big deal for the film franchise, but of course this then opens the door for other Jurassic Park media to now go in this direction. It opens the door. The films tend to have to lead the charge a little bit, but after Dominion does it, what's to say Camp Cretaceous can't do it, what's to say Jurassic World Evolution 2 can't do it. So let's say for now that Jurassic World Evolution is at some point, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, going to bring feathers into the game. Well, there's really only two main ways they can do that, and prepare yourselves for my top tier art here. No tracings today, all natural off the top of my head skill. So here we have a Struthia mimus that maybe needs to go on a little diet. Anyways, it's adorably chubby little Struthia mimus, and Struthia mimus is one of those dinosaurs that wasn't feathered in Evolution 1, but could feasibly be feathered if it returned in Evolution 2, because it isn't really established in the canon. Frontier actually has quite a lot of leeway that other people in the Jurassic franchise don't have. Anyways, the first way, and this would be the best way, but it's also not the likely way in my opinion, is you could have your Struthiomimus, you could have it looking like a big plucked chicken, or you could use your genetic toggle options, and you could give yourself a beautifully feathered Struthiomimus. And this is how a lot of people have suggested this to me in the comments. You know, for your raptors, for your all your dromaeosaurids, your ornithomimids, your tyrannosaurids, to an extent. Not really super much, considering T-Rex wouldn't have been. You know what I mean. The point is, people would want like a toggle option between a feathered and an unfeathered variant of the same dinosaur. Alternatively, boing, we could have simply, this one went downhill a little bit, but that would be our Morose, our Tyrannosaurid from Jurassic World Dominion, and basically that would be a feathered dinosaur, and Struthiomimus would be a plucked dinosaur, and there would be no overlap between the two. You're not going to get an unfeathered Morose, you're not going to get a feathered Struthi. Now, if I had to guess, I would suspect that, assuming feathers do make it into the game, and like I said, we'll talk about all that in a little bit, that this is probably the angle they're going to go with. It's a lot harder, of course, to have feathered and unfeathered variants for all the dinosaurs that would possibly have feathering. And it's a lot easier to just have a handful of dinosaurs that are feathered and like most that aren't, basically. You know, feathered dinosaurs could be treated in a way kind of like the aquatics and the aviaries. We're expecting, say, 5 to 6 of each. Could be entirely wrong, by the way, but that's kind of what I'd expect. And maybe it's the same for feathered. I wouldn't say there's a huge impetus on Frontier to have feathers in the game right now, because it just isn't part of the franchise. This is really the closest we ever got. It's one of the reasons the Jurassic Park 3 raptors are so loved. Amongst many others, they are the best designs in the franchise. But these, I hesitate to even call them feathers, proto-feathers, quills really is what they are, is basically the closest we got to feathering in any Jurassic Park media until now, until some of the mobile games and stuff like that as well. But in terms of canonical media, the films have largely ignored it as a source. They don't need to include feathers in order to match up with the canon or anything like that. They only need to do it to make us as viewers happy. Now, it's worth noting that is only the case if the Jurassic World Dominion dinosaurs don't make it into Evolution 2 at launch. I've gone back and forth on how that's going to work. I think maybe the ones from the preview will be in the game at launch, and then the ones from the rest of the film will come out in a DLC pack with the film, kind of like Fallen Kingdom did. Kind of in uncharted territory here, we don't really know how this is going to happen. It could turn out that all of the preview dinosaurs, and as I say, I'm not going to go through them here, don't make it into Jurassic World Evolution at launch, and instead they're all held back for what would be a fairly humongous, there's at least 9 dinosaurs that come to mind. It would be a humongous DLC, that would be awesome, and that's kind of why I think it won't happen. I think they'll spread it out, but still, it could be a thing. But the point is, Frontier doesn't have a big incentive in some ways to add feathers right now. Or do they? Let's talk about that. So not only would feathering be good for us fans, you know, if you want your unfeathered dinosaurs, the fact is 90% of the roster probably won't be feathered. So if you're sitting there at home thinking, I hate feathers, grrr, that's totally okay. Most of them won't be feathered. You know, that's just the way it is. But for those of us who like it, it'd be nice if we got thrown a bone. The interesting topic, and there's only 2 things I want to talk about remaining. Now, minor spoilers for Dominion, I guess, but not really, guys, let's be honest. But there's a T-Rex in the Jurassic World Dominion in the Cretaceous period, right? And the T-Rex looks like Rexy. But she does have some feathering. It's actually quite well done, quite paleo-accurate, because it's not, you know, it's not this... Because paleo has now begun to move very strongly away from the all-over body feathering that we used to see in Tyrannosaurus Rex, and now into much more sparse feathering, kind of like a proto-feather, quillish kind of look. And the Rex very much has that. So the interesting thing is then, when Dominion... Let's assume Jurassic World Evolution 2 launches with no feathered dinosaurs at all. When Dominion hits, do we get the feathered Rex as a whole new species, or does it become, as I talked about a little bit earlier, this kind of toggle option for the feathers? Because the Rex has to have both an unfeathered and a feathered variant. It's going to be the only dinosaur that has that dichotomy, but it will be there. It will have both types in the canon. And if there's one thing we love in Jurassic Park it's desperately clinging to the canon, so I'd be very surprised if Frontier doesn't try to include both. So could we see the feathered variant as a return to Jurassic Park style alternate model, alternate skin, alternate style for the Rex that's already in the game? Or will Cretaceous Rex, or whatever they want to call it, be an entirely new species of Rex that's feathered? That's just interesting to think about. There is one more thing though. So whilst on one side, canonically, Frontier don't have to include feathers right now. They could come up with a lovely list of dinosaurs, put them all in, no feathers, and frankly, we wouldn't have much room to complain. If when Dominion came out there was still no feathers, that would be disappointing, and I would be disappointed anyway. I think now that they're in the franchise, it would be nice to expand it to a few new creatures, just 4 or 5, as I said. I think that'd be plenty for a lot of us. But the other thing having no feathers does, is it actually restricts their creativity a little bit, so boop. When they're coming up with the dinosaur rosters for these games, in Jurassic World Evolution 1, before feathers were a thing, there was some dinosaurs they literally couldn't include. Yutyrannus and Therizinosaurus both being the first 2 examples that came to mind. Now of course, technically both of these dinosaurs could have made it into Jurassic World Evolution 1, but both dinosaurs are so intrinsically tied to being covered in feathers. Yutyrannus is, I mean that image is particularly special, but is, you know, the feathered Tyrannosaur where it all really started, and it's got proof of all this feathering all over its body, and Therizinosaurus is the danger floof, you know. These 2 dinosaurs are so intrinsically feathered that it would be weird to include them without feathers, and since feathers weren't part of the canon back in Jurassic World Evolution 1, and Frontier was very unlikely to ever introduce feathers of their own accord, you know, they're always going to follow what the films set out. That makes a lot of sense. So they basically couldn't include these dinosaurs in the first place. But now they can. You know, the roster has, as long as they're willing to bring in feathering, the roster does inherently open up and expand to these fan favourite dinosaurs. Both of these are hyper popular dinosaurs. Therizinosaurus in particular is probably the most requested dinosaur. I would say it's literally number 1 for most requested dinosaurs. Yutyrannus a little bit less so, but it's my personal favourite, so I want to see it come in, and I know there's at least one of you watching it who is also a big fan of the Yutyrannus. It's just interesting to think about. Like I said, there's no new information here. I just kind of wanted to open up to discussion with you guys. As I started to think about feathering, I thought this would be a super short video, because in my head it was like, will we have feathers? Yes, no, maybe, let's discuss the benefits. And it's like, well, yeah, but how does this tie in with Dominion? And how does that reflect upon the rest of the roster? And how come we couldn't do this before? And how does it tie into the wider canon? And where will people stand? And then how will it integrate into the game? It's actually, whilst it's fairly simple on the face of it, I think it says a lot about where the game can go and what type of game Frontier want to make here. I am a little interested how it would work. Feathers are, one of the problems with feathers is they're very difficult to render. They're very intense on the system if you want proper feathering. And we see things like Hairworks from Nvidia, which will give us hyper-realistic feathers, but it's also very intense in your system. And the fact is, I don't think the Xbox One or the PS4, and I don't want to cite console limitations, but when it comes to pure graphical output, console limitations are a real thing. So full body realistic feathering is much harder to render on an older console than it is on the next gen stuff. So I don't know how you'd get around that. I think you can probably have a auto setting that just makes the feathers sparser. It could literally be a setting, let's say you're on PC, denseness of feathers kind of thing. I know you can do that kind of thing on Hairworks, so I don't know enough about the topic to get too much further into that, but it's an interesting thing to talk about. Like I say, the only real information we have is right here, the tweeter. But I thought it was worth opening up to you guys, you know, start a discussion. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you want feathers? Do you not want feathers, and why? What dinosaurs would you want to see feathered? How would you want to see them implemented into the game? Someone suggested, and I think it could be a really good idea, to have them as one of the rewards for challenge mode, because it's kind of like outside of the franchise a little bit, so you have to do your extra challenges to bring them into the game, stuff like that. At this point, there's a billion directions they could go, and it's not the most important thing for Evolution 2, you know, combat and social stuff and aquariums, blah blah blah, that's still more important than what we need to see first, but I'm excited about the possibilities. I think they could look really, really cool, so yeah, I really hope we get some feathered dinosaurs personally. Let me know what you think, throw me a like if you enjoyed this video. I'll see you lovely folks next time. Thanks for joining me, cheers myself as always, bye bye.
reaching out.